And one thing is certain, people in the same culture do not all think alike. Culture is not monolithic, and it is not static. On the contrary, culture is dynamic, and is constantly being challenged, and thus changed by the people themselves. In all cultures, people are critical agents of change, and I think this is what WLP is focusing on. And as you all know, engaging these agents of change is essential for mobilizing women's rights and eliminating violence against women. As we work through our organization in 140 countries to promote human rights and dignity, especially women's rights and the right to sexual and reproductive health, and we are constantly learning from our experiences. In our work, we are guided by the agreement reached in 1994 at the International Conference on Population and Development, and naturally it's linked to the Beijing conferences, all based on the International Declaration of Human Rights. And over the past decades, we have learned that population issues boil down to one factor: the decisions that people, and especially women, can or cannot make about their lives. And the difficulty was in bringing the private relationship into the public space, and thus comes the impact of cultures and beliefs. When you talk about sexual and reproductive health, you're bringing the bedroom to the public, and that's the most challenging way of dealing with these issues in a public space, and thus it's natural it will create reactions against it or for it. Whether it is a decision about using contraception, or sending a daughter to school, or seeking health care during pregnancy or childbirth, and you heard the story of the mother-in-law, so it's not only men, or moving to a new city or country, the decisions that people make or cannot make are deeply rooted in their specific socioeconomic and cultural context. We also know that discriminatory attitudes and practices towards women are deeply rooted within social norms and cultural understandings, and are often stronger than the laws that have been enacted to stop them. While an effective legal framework is a precondition for ending violence against women and absolutely necessary, it is not enough to change attitudes and behaviors, because it depends on implementation of these laws. We have to work from at least two levels. We have to work from the national level through equitable laws and policies and a functioning legal system, which is informed by international standards, monitoring, and international support, and also from the community level through social change. And understanding one's own culture as it relates to human rights principles becomes a means for empowerment for individuals and communities to shape their own future and claim their own rights. We have learned that to get to the root of these issues, it is necessary to go deeper, to wear a cultural lens, to use what we call a culturally sensitive approach to facilitate change from within. Such an approach is based on the principle of mutual respect and grounded in a process of community ownership, active listening, and dialogue. Sometimes it's the smallest symbol in a specific context that can bring about a great movement for change. I hope that many of you have seen the film Moladi that we produced in Nigeria, I believe it was Nigeria, which clearly describes how the African tradition of putting a thin rope across an open door changes the house into a safe space for protecting little girls from female genital mutilation cutting, which is followed by change in the thinking and the behavior of the village through discussions and negotiations. I think you can Google it, you should see it. It's a very powerful film of a story of a woman as she was trying to fight violence against women in her own village. From the outset, this approach takes into account the broad political, economic, social, and cultural and legal frameworks with which human behavior and action take place. And this approach would facilitate the adoption of new laws or the enactment of existing ones in line with international standards such as CEDAW, as well as a more serious attempt at implementation. Through a review of case studies, we have found that effective programs to end violence against women are based on a deep understanding of the culture in which they are operating, and the relationships and the power relationships and the active participation of the community they serve. This is important because violations of women's rights are often sanctioned under the cover of patriarchal interpretation of cultural practices and norms, and also sacred text. Also, violations of women's rights, especially violence against women, takes place in families and communities, often far removed from the judicial system and the domain of national laws. Thus comes the importance of empowering communities to understand and change the behavior of its members at the community level itself, either by ending the practice of violence, protecting women, and also establishing community-based legal support systems to deal with such violations and the links with the national legal system. In Mauritania, as an example, survivors of rape, and the panel mentioned it today, survivors of rape are often blamed for the crime and thrown in jail while the perpetrators go free. Correcting this gross injustice and getting society to recognize the problem of rape at all began with the grassroots efforts of 4 Mauritanian midwives who could no longer ignore the stories they were hearing from their clients. With our support, the first statistics were collected and a center was established to respond to the multiple needs of survivors. But central to overcoming resistance was a strong, charismatic Mauritanian woman called Zainabou bin Talib Moussa. To this day, she continues to press for justice in her country. Her personality, combined with her status as an experienced midwife, helped her gain support not only from the local people, but also government officials. Around her, she gathered imams and other religious leaders, lawyers, magistrates, doctors, police officers, psychiatrists, and other midwives, people who would otherwise be difficult to bring together. Many of these high-profile individuals subsequently lobbied the government of Mauritania to acknowledge the problem of sexual violence and to introduce strategies to combat it. But as I said, change takes a long time, and the efforts are still ongoing.